Siamo siea equals quatslama shwo huam tel swe. Alale tel swe, dus de elas papkalas tel swe, dus alale wat de Kwakwee. Ejka chwanelmach de soft de moch. Greetings, everyone. I just did my formal greeting in Halkomelem language, as did Cheryl prior to me. And I thank the people of the Coast Salish Nation for being here today. You know, when you come to a gathering like this, a lot of times you don't really know what it is that people are really wanting to hear, what they want to say. So I'm going to share a little bit of my experience. And can I just hit this? Good. Perspectives from both sides of the fence. From a heritage rights and heritage resources advisor to a consulting scientist with EBA engineering. That's some pictures of when I was working at Chehalis just recently. I grew up in Upper Nicola on the Nicola Lake Stock Ranch. I didn't know Indians were Indians until about grade 8. Everybody that was on the ranch was Aboriginal. And we didn't learn anything about it in school at all. Believe it or not, it was when I picked up a hitchhiker on the way to Vancouver and found out that Aboriginal people actually had a history going back 3,500 years where I grew up. I decided at that point in time I was going to be an archaeologist. And I registered at university at that point in time. From, I even hate to say how long I did it, but from 1969 until 1981, I was a government archaeologist, the last field archaeologist with the BC government. And in those days, we did Aboriginal consultation, although we didn't call it that. It was listening to people and these sorts of things. And subsequently, in 1981, I was asked by the Stalo Nation, when Cheryl was there, not long after your naming ceremony, to work for the Stalo, well, we say Huelmoch, Interchlapmoch, and Sequepmoch, the Shushwa, all of the tribes and bands down the North Thompson River, right down into Vancouver, regarding the CNR Twin Tracking Project. And during that period, I was working for 38 different bands. And the interesting thing was, I was working on the Aboriginal side, but my professor at Simon Fraser was working for the railway company. It got a little awkward, especially when I was no longer allowed to talk with him at university. And as it was, it did work out okay at the end of the day. From there, I worked 14 years with the Stalo Nation and 9 years with the Sta'elis, or Chehalis Indian Band. Doing a little bit of archaeology here with some kids at Chehalis, teaching them hands-on about some of their culture. Nowadays, mostly what I do is dig holes related to other things other than archaeology with different band members. Key to my experience, and you know, I'm one of those too, if you got a question, you can throw it out in the middle of as I'm going along, because I kind of prefer doing it that way. Understanding Aboriginal communities is important, especially cultural sensitivities. And one example of that, when BC Hydro was planning on doing the ILM project recently, they asked me, when I was in title and rights at Chehalis, they said, are there any serious issues with this? And I said, yes. You can't do any tower construction in October. Why not? I said, well, people are spiritual bathing in the area that you want to put the towers in. And this is something that we could not have outside people involved with this, because there are very, very sensitive things, especially with those who are initiates into what we call the smitla, the winter dance ceremonial. Cultural diversity as well. We have over 30 different languages that are spoken in British Columbia. 209, 220 First Nations are here, 620 across Canada. Every single one of those is different, and they look at themselves as different from one another. Some examples. Kind of where I grew up, working with Stan Green at Chehalis and the Mission Indian Friendship Center. But it's gatherings like this one here. This was in a public park. People did not realize what was taking place here. What this was recognizing the fact that this public park was actually an Aboriginal place. And there was a naming ceremony here, and the purpose of this naming ceremony was actually to give people the names of that place so that they identified with it. Key that I wanted to, if I have nothing else to say today, this is it. First Nations are governments. And managing all of those different portfolios of provincial and federal governments with a limited staff and limited council and resources. I've been in First Nations where we have 8 members. 8. Now you're trying to do everything from intergovernmental relations, I said, and go through this list. Health services, housing, education, lands, water, fisheries, forestry, Aboriginal title and rights, all the legal stuff. Human resources, natural resources, administration, infrastructure, public works, capital works, tourism, economic development, IT, communications, and everything else, from sports to death. On top of that, we're dealing with all of those issues that happen in Native communities on an ongoing basis. I was talking with somebody in our company in one of our other offices, and he said, I'm not dealing with First Nations anymore. And I said, why not? He said, the last 2 times I went out, the office was closed after the meeting was there. So I phoned up and I found out why. People had died. The office was closed. We lost $1 million. So this is government, and this is, we were taking care of all of those things at Chehalis, and they have, believe it or not, we say 220 people working at the band office. But when you look at all of those different areas that they have to deal with, you can start getting a perspective on development and consultants that are coming in from the outside. They want to put in a mine. Who's going to deal with it? They want to put in a run-of-river project. Who's going to deal with it? Okay, that comes under other duties, right? One of the key impacts of legal successes, particularly with Dalgamouth, Haida, and Taku, has been the issue of what we call referrals. How many understand what referrals are? Okay, a few don't. With those court decisions, it became a legal duty for the governments of Canada and British Columbia in particular to inform Aboriginal peoples of any developments that were taking place in their traditional territory. Some First Nations have a fairly large territory. The Splatseen, for example, located out of Enderby. Their territory extends from the Big Bend in the Columbia River down to the border, and from the Rocky Mountains across to the Purcells and a bit further over, including 21 cities. Every single development that occurs in that area, they receive a notice from the government. I did a workshop up there with them in terms of trying to deal with it. I said, you can't handle all of this with a staff of 2. Okay, and they were getting, you know, like 5,000 referrals a year on this. So, you know, the issue of referrals is how do you deal with this? I had one from BC Hydro on the ILM project, 27,000 pages when I was at Chehalis, one referral. And, you know, here's my buddy, James. We started handling things in a way, and I was brought on, among other things, for one reason. They said, look, you got to make referrals pay for themselves. And so we did eventually make them work and all of that. But it is a big, big, big issue with every single First Nation I've ever met. How do we deal with it? There's a stack in the corner of papers over here, some of which is worth $1 million. This one is worth $5 million, and they can't deal with it. There's nobody to do that work. The impact of the political successes at the same time has been having a phenomenal effect in Aboriginal society, resulting in the negotiation of impact benefit agreements with proponents. Yes, I did those. Meaningful engagement and input into environmental assessment process. I was responsible for that. First Nations revenue sharing. That's happening more and more on an ongoing basis. And when Jerry talks a little later on, you won't believe how fantastic some of these relationships are. with the tall tan. I'm not going to steal any of his fire. But with the Forest Cur project, and there's Volcano project and other projects that are up in the tall tan area. Elk Valley in the Tanaka area, Williams Lake Indian Band and Chatsel First Nation with Mount Polly. You know, if you want to check that out, I put the link there. BC Revenue Sharing, First Nations. There's pages of it, and there's phenomenal information that is there to look at. Forest Consultation Revenue Sharing Agreements. They went from FRAs to FROs, now they're FCRSAs, okay? Everybody in the Aboriginal community understands what those are. Then there's the development and recognition of land management plans. A lot of these have happened because of the treaty process. Land transfer agreements. I did one of those, okay? And it was a government action regulation order where 25 square miles of land was turned over to the Aboriginal people for exclusive use for the winter dance ceremonial. A place to put away their gear, finally, where they don't have to worry about it being cut down anymore. Somebody from the forestry department coming into the forestry office with somebody's sacred pole that they wrap around a sapling that's supposed to become one, a life pole, over time. Saying, hey, what's this? And they're wondering why the guy's sick in the community because his spirit has been upset. Cooperation agreements, land and resource management agreements. All of this with, and this is one of those that was reflected, Chief Stephen Point, and this is the recognition of the 25 square miles that happened. And then we have the issue of treaty versus non-treaty First Nations. There's a lot of fighting between the different groups that are there. What people don't realize is 53 of 209 First Nations in British Columbia are not involved in the treaty process. Guess who's getting all the money? Those that are in the treaty process are being funded. And yes, the idea behind it is they will get funds to negotiate treaty with government, and there will be a financial and settlement agreement afterwards where they get lands and so on and so forth. But those that are not involved in the treaty process are getting nothing. So we have a big difference in capacity just between those two groups. Those that are being funded, a lot of them have gone out and hired consultants like myself to work for them to help move things forward. And you have things like this. Contaminated sites. Well, you can't settle an agreement with First Nations if you have a contaminated site. You can't turn over contaminated lands to them if they're going to move into self-government. So INAC, or ANSI, as some are now referring to it, are funding the cleanup of contaminated sites on reserves and First Nations that are actually going to go through the treaty process. But don't even bother asking if you don't have a treaty in hand. Human resource limitations. We have these in terms of people's education and their expertise and capacity generally in a First Nation community. It's really, really hard a lot of times. Outside consultants, lawyers, everyone wears many hats, especially the chief. These were the roles that I had when I was in title and rights at Chehalis. And I don't want to go through them all, but these are a few of them, and make everything pay for itself. And enough so that we can hire some extra staff. First Nation, capacity, capacity, capacity. To engage with consultants, to engage with government, and to engage with proponents. And that is a really, really big issue with everything from forestry to mining companies. It's complex, really, really complex, and it's very, very demanding. And we wonder why suicide rates and everything are so high on Indian reserves a lot of times. I worked for more years than I like to think, right, since 1981 until 3 years ago, and I started work for an engineering company. And some people say, why? Why'd you go? And I said, I need to make some money. You know, you live in the community, you believe in it, and so on and so forth, but at a time when you don't have any pension anymore, and you know you're getting closer and closer and closer to retirement age, and you got nothing. You know, and so many times it was, we can't pay you this week. Why? Well, the money didn't come through from INAC, so nobody's getting paid. And, you know, you fight the cause, and those things happen, and you start saying, how the hell am I going to pay my mortgage, right? You know, Everybody in the community is dealing with this. So the poverty is incessant, but you just learn to live with it. And so I started working for this company. I went for an interview on a Friday. I put my application in on a Friday, was interviewed on the Tuesday, and started the next Friday. It's a big company, and the interesting thing is I moved from one area of kind of just getting comfortable with all that stuff into one where, what am I doing here, right? I had to learn about mining, energy, infrastructure, transportation, environment, water, and a whole bunch of other things. We've got 14 offices in Canada, and no sooner had I got going with this company, 6 months we were bought by another company, Big Fish, okay? We thought we were a fish, we bought some companies, but then we got bought by another company. They decided that they wanted to go international, so they came into Canada, and they bought, oh, is this going by itself? Oh. Nope, gotta go backwards here. Page up. This one here, 14,000 scientists, 20 countries, 50 offices in Canada, 300 worldwide. We have partner companies now that were bought, Wardrop Engineering, BPR Engineering, BNG Engineering, Franson Engineering, Parkland Pipeline, and Tetra Tech Construction Canada. And I'm the only person in Aboriginal relations for 15,000 people. Kind of going back to working for First Nations again, right? Okay, there's capacity, and more capacity. However, there's a big learning curve that's taking place on both sides of the street, I'm realizing. Most engineers are so surprised that you have to talk with Aboriginal people. We just want to build the bridge. We just want to put in the mine, okay? We can do all of that. And like Cheryl was saying earlier, the most complicated part of these projects is not the technical stuff that is there, it's the human relations component that is there. There's all sorts of things that are going on, but it's interesting with Delgamuukw, Haida, and Taku, it's created an industry of consultants. When I started this job, it was really funny. They said, okay, you need a title. And I said, I don't really need a title. And they said, you're going to be the Aboriginal Relations Specialist. And I said, well, can't we just say Aboriginal Relations? They said, no, we need to increase the profile of our company. So I said, okay, it's not going to work, right? So I went out to Chehalis and I said, I passed my card out. And James looked at me, he broke up laughing. He said, shit, he said, I'm going to get me a new card too. White man specialist. Okay? So, we used to be called by a lot of different names, heritage consultant, heritage advisor, and so on and so forth. And when I started doing this back in '81, the chief said to me, well, I was working for 38 chiefs at that point in time, but primarily one was close by, and I said, what is heritage? And he said, everything. Everything that we do is our heritage. Without it, without any one part of it, it's not our heritage anymore. Consulting works in many ways, and one of the interesting things about this whole thing with consultants, I mean, at one point in time, there was me and 2 other people that were the consultants in the province. We called ourselves heritage advisors. That was it. There's over 200 now, okay, that are doing the type of work that I do. A lot of them are hired directly by the companies themselves, and what it is, there's a lot of ex-government pats, okay, that have taken on the idea that I can do an awful lot of big things, okay, doing for First Nations by going and working out in the community. But after a while, a lot of them realize that it's tough. It's a tough world, the Aboriginal world. They don't get a lot of money for a lot of these things. They don't last very long. Next thing you know, they're working for the mining companies, or they're working for the energy company, and so on and so forth at the end of it. Right? So one of the things here is a lesson. Know your consultant. Now, one of the really important things I think that, to ensure ethics. Now, every Aboriginal consultant I know has got strong, strong ethics. But a lot of those ex-government pats don't have the same ethic, okay, that I like to think that I myself carry. And I come from a background of being an anthropologist. And when I started working for this mining company in Ontario recently, I said, you have to remember, I'm an anthropologist. My first and foremost obligation is to the people I study. That is our code of ethics. First thing. Fine, they said. So it's really important to get to understand some of those values, particularly with the people, if you're ever going to be in a situation where you're going to be hiring somebody, and some of you are. Capacity, capacity, capacity. Every project requires an Aboriginal component. And I say pretty much every project, because people say, well, it's just projects that are on Crown land. Well, no, it's not. Any project that has the potential of impacting Aboriginal rights, even if it is on private land, can have that effect. So visual impacts to an Aboriginal community, that is an impact. Okay, so there's a lot of things that take place there. Engagement with First Nations, engagement with proponents, engagement with government, every single one of those that I know, and government agencies, BC Hydro, all require consultation with Aboriginal peoples. This is compounded by the size of companies. In our company, we have an office in the Yukon. We work with all the First Nations up there. 40 employees, 5,000 projects. Every single one of those projects requires some form of consultation. And in our 14 offices, 100,000 projects. There's always a risk in relationships. This is from Savinaw, by the way, at the stop right there above the lake. I like this one here because that's actually called Kylie's penis. And, but it's illustrative at the same time of how fragile some relationships can be. And you know what? You got to work on them. Mining. One of the things I found out doing the job from the corporate side is the jargon. You know, and after a while I started going, every time it would come up, right? Oh, we got to do a PA. What's a PA? What's a PEA? What's a PDR? A BD, PFS, and EIS, and NI 43101. Okay, any of you that have been involved with mining, you know, Cheryl knows what all of these are, right? But you know, when I first started, all these names were coming out on that side, and I was saying, I'm just here, right? Do I have to know all of these things? The answer is, yeah, you kind of have to know all of those things. You have to be able to write all of those things as well. The key thing here is best practices, okay? In a company like ours, we provide a service. We aren't a mine. We provide a service. Cheryl provides a service with her company, okay? And you provide a service. When you provide a service, people are saying, what's the benefit for us? Well, we're saying hire us. You know, like, please hire us. Because we're trying to do high quality work at the lowest bid. And sometimes, and you know what? It's not always that case. Because what we say a lot of times, people say, your prices are really high. Yes, they are high. They say, well, we're going to go with somebody cheaper. And we say, it'll cost you more. No, it won't. It's cheaper. But at the end of the day, they'll change their scope of work. Okay, we can do it faster in some cases. Okay, we try not to overbid on anything. The ones we bid on, we say we can do it faster than anybody, better than anybody else, in a much shorter period of time. And when I started working in this company, one of the interesting things happened, right? I came to work for the first week, and then I left. And like Monday morning, I got in, and they sort of said, where's your time card? I said, what time card? They said, your time card, billable time. And so I said, oh, I didn't know that. The difference here is I'm working in a company now with a consulting company where everything is billable time. So I'm a person that's involved much more in the relationship. I didn't put a lot of stuff down here. I could have gone on and on about all different things, but issues of concern for First Nations, especially in consultation practices with mines and everything. Consultation logs, what a burr in the ass that is. Every consulting company that is out there at the present time, you contact First Nation by email, they're recording it. The phone call, the conversation's recorded, okay, afterwards. Go to a meeting, there's meeting notes. All this goes into the consultation record. And it's very important. I got into trouble initially with a mining company about this. I said, I will not put in a consultation record into a PDR report without the explicit permission of a First Nation. Different values. Client expectation, First Nation expectation, and consultant rates. Well, bands look at quality work, band rates, and being comprehensive. Work, 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 right? Everybody looks at it. The client, how cheap can you get it done? How fast can you get it done? And next, okay, that's a big part of it. Good relationships are mandatory. And it's really important to recognize the difference of cultural traditions and being culturally sensitive. Cultural sensitivity is really important. Just always be transparent, honest. At the end, that's what it's about. Listen. Honesty is important. Don't promise anything you can't deliver. Respect cultural differences and being sensitive to values. And there's different types of relationships when you're a consultant. There's the relationship between the client and the First Nation, the client and the consultant and the First Nation, and then any of the contractors that are hired in the First Nation. It gets complex, especially if there's things like impact benefit agreements are involved. Working together. One of the important things for best practices is opportunities. They got to be real opportunities at each stage of a project, not just pie in the sky somewhere down the road. I've been in this period of time signing agreements or having memorandums of understanding signed. You know what happens with a lot of them? You get put in a pile in the corner. There's nobody following through in the company on some of these things. So it's very, very important that you have to build this into the capacity development of the client themselves sometimes. Recognizing that meaningful training programs are important and that education is number one. And we do an awful lot with training programs. And one of the things that I had to teach our guys was, yes, you can hire people. And they say, no, we can't. We don't have the WCB coverage and everything else that's here. They haven't gone through all of our safety training programming. I said, we hire them on contract. We subcontract the band to provide technicians to us. That way they are responsible for their own training levels. And they get paid without having to pay taxes. Okay, they're there and they have to take care of their own WCB and everything at that end. So we've been doing very well with this. These are just different projects, okay, that we're working on. This is one at Kwakwee, and this was an interesting scenario. Capacity again. Kwakwee Development Corporation. I went out there doing a little business development with them. Ran into the general manager, acting general manager of the Kwakwee Development Corporation, and she said, oh, it's great you're working for this company. She said, we've been trying to get municipal contracts to be able to bid on some of those for years, but you have to have a relationship with an engineering firm. I said, we got one now. Oh, that's great. 2 weeks later, she phoned back. We did this contract here, part of the Gateway project. Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure did not plan to give it to them. They were planning to give it to someone else because they knew that they didn't have the capacity. They got $400,000 of work for Kwakwee Coast Marine out of that project, another $100,000 for management and administration costs. They said they wanted to manage the project. Why? 13%. It's a good enough reason to manage. So all we do in our company in these situations, if they don't have the capacity, we write the proposals out for them with the idea that we get the work at the end of the day, and it's been working out pretty good. Establish communication protocols that incorporate and reflect community values. Really, really important, because otherwise, and you got to watch that the message does get out, it does get across. Because a lot of times you're talking with so-and-so in the band office, but he's not got anything to do with communications. The person who's doing the newsletter and or the chief have to be in the loop as well. Okay, legal does matter at the end of the day, and do not assume that everyone in your company is as knowledgeable as you are about First Nations. Like, what is this? Okay, that's why nothing was done on the mine today. Exactly. Know that fellow professionals, especially engineers, may not understand how things work on Aboriginal projects. And a good example of this was, I did presentations at work. And I said, look, this is an INAC contract. It ends March 31st. Well, they hadn't finished the work by March 31st. And I said, all invoices got to be done March 31st, final invoice. And we got a note from the nation. please send your final, capital letters, invoice. They sent the invoice for the work to date, and then in July they put in another invoice. And the First Nation said, the project is over. It ended March 31st. So, you know, sometimes you got to tell them twice. You know, and it can be meaningful. Fairness. This is the other thing I was talking earlier with Howard, right? Over here. Fairness is really important, and Rex mentioned it as well. You know, it's a two-way street. A lot of Aboriginal people have learned about, these impact benefit agreements and everything else, and how things are supposed to work. And I've noticed in some cases there's an excess of, call it greed, in there. And the companies are just knocked off their feet when they hear what's wanted here. Do keep in mind when you're in a situation like us, and Cheryl said, sometimes there's an education process that has to take place on both sides of the street to see what's going on. We've been involved in recognition and some of these things, but in the end, it's all about relationships and building better communities. Thank you.